The unprecedented protests that have gripped Iran for nearly 3 weeks began in the heart of Tehran's sweeping commercial district, where shopkeepers organized a strike in late December. Iran's currency hit a record low against the U.S. dollar and crashed its already stunted economy, making even the most basic goods unaffordable. Frustrations boiled over, hundreds of thousands of Iranians flooded the streets, and the government cracked down with a level of violence that has not been seen in Iran for decades. At funerals for dead protesters, mourners chanted that this is the year of blood. More than 3,000 people have died in Iran's nationwide protests. That's according to rights activists. In response, President Trump has threatened new U.S. strikes 7 months after ordering strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, if that happens, Iran says it will retaliate. Corruption is rampant in Iran. The country's largest industries are dominated by semi-private foundations that are run by allies of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They receive favorable contracts, and they keep wealth concentrated among the ruling elite. U.S. sanctions against Iran have been in place largely since 1979, and today, Iran is the second most sanctioned nation in the world behind Russia. There was a little bit of a break while Iran was involved in the nuclear deal. There are thousands of restrictions against trading with, investing in, importing from, or exporting to Iran. And the U.S. and others have piled on even more restrictions over the years, targeting Iran's oil industry and its financial institutions. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal with the United States and 6 other world powers lifted many of these sanctions. And I visited Iran as that deal was being finalized and spoke with people there. The one thing Iranians kept telling us then was how much their sanctions were holding back their prosperity. But after President Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal in 2018, he reinstated yet harsher sanctions against Iran. More have followed since, including new sanctions against top leaders in Iran's Revolutionary Guard that were announced just this past Thursday. The Iranian people have very little say when it comes to their government's controversial nuclear program or its hostile relations with the United States, yet they're the ones who pay the price. Since 2020, Iranian currency has lost nearly 700% of its value compared to the dollar, making even basic goods beyond reach for so many, which is why protesters are out on the streets now denouncing their government. Joining me now is Negar Mortazavi, an Iranian-American journalist and political analyst. She's the editor and host of the Iran podcast, as well as a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy in Washington. Negar, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Ali.
It is very hard to get accurate information out of Iran right now, largely because of the communication shutdown. Where are we right now? What are you hearing about what's happening in Iran?
Exactly. It's been a near week of near blackout, although today they seem to be restoring communication very slowly. I saw some friends and family slowly getting online, and over the past few days, only very limited number of people who have access to Starlink or certain other connections were able to connect to the outside world. Where we are, as you gave an excellent overview, is at least over 3,000 people killed in what is the deadliest and most brutal crackdown of mass protests in recent history of the Islamic Republic. I mean, mass protests, anti-government protests have been recurring in Iran, and the crackdown and the repression has been ramping up. And this was by far the deadliest, and I think that the death toll will be going up, injuries and those arrested. It started in the heart of Tehran Bazaar with a spark, essentially an economic spark, the devaluation of the Iranian currency, and just really deteriorating life conditions for working class, middle classes, as you said, as a result of a triangle of mismanagement and corruption inside the country and very severe economic sanctions from the outside.
Negar, the part of the problem, and we saw this in Venezuela, is that on one hand, the United States can be helpful on this front. On the other hand, we need to understand what the goal is and how you center the Iranian people in this mission. That's not clear that that's what's coming. What would that look like? What would an American response and policy that actually, for once, centers the Iranian people look like right now?
Let me just add this point that this is also the first time that we saw very clear connection. I mean, the Iranian state is saying interfere or essentially incitement or a stoking of these protests, but at least we saw very serious connection, clear connection with the outside, with the U.S. president for the first time, such comments saying the U.S. is locked and loaded essentially implying that there's a military threat in connection to the protest, or Israeli officials towards the beginning, especially suggesting that there's some form of connection or support from them. Former U.S. Secretary of State and head of CIA suggesting that Iranian protesters have a Mossad agent behind every one of them who's supporting them. These statements, true or not, or at whatever level you assess them, are taken seriously by the Iranian state. And I would say it just added fuel to the fire on the state's repression side, on the crackdown, essentially gave them the reason or the excuse to crack down on these protests, call them rioters, call them seditionists, and really just use 3 days of blackout and mass crackdown to, as they call it, wrap the protest. But as far as the U.S., to your point, I mean, the U.S. has a lot of options as far as hard power. You know, the U.S. military, very mighty, has been in that region. But if we also look at the track record of U.S. military in that region, the regime change wars, the non-regime change wars, the various forms of intervention, I can't think of an example that really helped bring in democracy or better governance or usher in the peaceful transition to power. So I'd like to know what the options are and what the example is that people are thinking of that would be helping the protesters or bring in positive change.
So after 2018, when Donald Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal that the international community and the U.S. deemed was achieving some goal, it had the effect of empowering hardliners in Iran. For a little while, both sides were talking about getting back into some deal, in fact, fairly recently. Is that a better road to go down than this? I just don't know what success looks like here.
I think so. I mean, in the past 4 decades, U.S. and Iran have only been on a path of animosity towards conflict. And the only period that we saw change was under Barack Obama, when he was determined for diplomacy, for a nuclear deal. He delivered in the form of JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. And then after that, President Trump came and he pulled out of that deal or wanted to negotiate a deal simply because it was cut by President Obama and not seen as good enough for him. And from the Iranian view, they said, we cut a deal, we negotiated a deal with the United States of America. We don't care who the president was, which party was, or your domestic policies. We need some continuity. We can't cut a deal every 2 years. This was cut in 2015, started 2016, and then comes President Trump 2017. So since then, I would say the pulling out of the nuclear deal, assassinating a top Iranian general, bringing the countries on the brink of war, we've really been on a downward spiral to conflict, and that's where we are now. In June, actually, we saw a glimpse of that war between Iran, the U.S., and Israel.
I remind people this is a country with more than 90 million people in it, sort of in the center of the world. We need to get this right. Negar, thank you so much for your analysis. Negar Mortazavi is a journalist, a political analyst, and the host of the Iran podcast, a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy.